What up, gunfighters? Gonna be a little bit more informal today than normal. Driving on the range, gonna have quite a drive on a long dirt road to set up a shooting range out in the wilderness up in northern Idaho, the Redoubt. Hanging out with my shooting companion here, Alexander Hamilton, Rhodesian Ridgeback extraordinaire. I thought it would be a good chance to, while in the mobile studio, more mobile than normal, as you know, my wife and I live as nomads if you listen regularly, answer some questions, some Q&A on all manner of topics on feedback. Now, if it's just a feedback on the podcast that I get like, really good podcast, I really appreciate those, but I'm not going to mention those because they're probably not helpful to you guys. I really do appreciate every review and everything like that. Hopefully it helps in the mysterious algorithm and however that works. So if you haven't left a review of the podcast, consider doing so. But if you asked a question, I'm going to try and answer some of those today, of those questions that you guys have longing to have an answer for. First of all, I'm humbled that you come here. I'm humbled that I've been blessed by God with the training and experience, military, law enforcement, combat veteran, state rifle and pistol champion. That's about all the bio we'll get into today on, unless it's germane to the actual question, I might go into a little bit more. But one of the feedbacks I got was maybe don't mention the bio in every episode. So we'll forego the lengthy bio. First thing I want to talk about, got a question. What do I think about the 2011 and 10 millimeter? I think it's probably the best 10 millimeter ever made by humans. Period. That being said, how much 10 millimeter do you need? Not how much should you have the right to own. If you want a high capacity 10 millimeter, rock on, right? If you want a, 40 round stick mag of 10 millimeter, have at it. If you want and I'm talking handgun, but if you wanted a, MP5 in 10 millimeter, which I believe they made, that would be an awesome gun. But for a handgun, what's your use scenario for the 10 millimeter? I would imagine that the majority of the time, a single stack 1911, like a Colt Delta Elite rail, would be a great choice, and it will hold, 7, 8, 10 rounds easily of 10 millimeter. 10 rounds of 10 millimeter is a lot of firepower. So the STIs, the old STI Perfect 10 is what we're talking about. It was called the Perfect 10, a phenomenal gun. So I think it's probably the best 10 millimeter ever made. That said, if you're using it for hunting, right, there's a lot of, as I've been a professional big game hunter and guide, there's a lot of propensity for a follow-up shot, maybe 2 follow-up shots. But if you need 10 follow-up shots, the 11th one probably not going to help you, is my opinion on that as far as 10 millimeter capacity goes for hunting. If you want it for defense, that's a big gun. You're probably good either way with capacity. However, where I think the 10 millimeter STI shines is quality craftsmanship. STIs are some of the finest handguns ever made. I have no reason to think the STI Perfect 10 would be any less than that. Also, STIs are known for being some of the softest shooting guns, whether it's a 9mm or a 40 Smith & Wesson, which is common for USPSA Open Division, 40 Smith & Wesson, which is common for USPSA Limited Division, and 38 Super, which is common for USPSA Open Division. Okay, they are known for being some of the softest shooting guns, period. There's no reason to believe that STI Perfect 10 would not be a soft shooting 10 millimeter. And that, gunfighters, is a big advantage. So what do I think about the STI 2011 10 millimeter, aka the Perfect 10? I think it's probably the best 10 millimeter handgun ever made from a performance standpoint, period. So there's that one. Also, one of the listeners talked to me, and is one of the listeners I actually know in real life, got talking to him at the gym, and he asked what I did, and he started listening to the podcast. He's also into guns, carries, goes and trains, and he was asking me after some lighthearted gun chat at the gym about overpenetration. And here, to put it succinctly, what are my thoughts on overpenetration? My thought number one, and this is basically what I told him, and then I'll probably expand on that, but basically what I told him is, worry about problem number one first. Problem number one is stopping the threat. Pretty much any defensive round, whether it's rifle, pistol, or handgun, that can have a reasonable expectation to stop a human being is going to go through drywall. Period. So worry about problem number one first. I said a more honest test of all these people testing out overpenetration is shoot a human torso analog first and then see how many walls it penetrates. Because you should be concentrating on hitting the threat. You shouldn't be concentrating on spraying rounds into drywall. Hit the threat. Most of the energy, unless you're using something like a giant round, is going to be dissipated in that target. The human, and this is expounding on what I told him, but the human body is a resilient thing. I, by God's grace, have survived many things that probably should have killed me. Some phenomenal things. The human body is very resilient, can be very resilient. Let me put it to you this way. I can easily punch a hole in drywall, right? I can just with one fist punch a hole in drywall. I can't punch a hole through you. Dumb and Dumber is perhaps, so what does this have to do with gunfighting? I'll get there. Dumb and Dumber is perhaps the greatest comedy of all time. It is the STI Perfect 10 of comedies. Dumb and Dumber is hilarious. One of the few comedies you could watch multiple times and still laugh. It is great for comedy value. It is not great for fighting tactics. You may remember a scene where he reaches in and grabs a guy's heart out of his chest and drops it in a doggy bag. That's comedy, right? You're not punching a hole through people. Even Bruce Lee, like, he's not punching a hole through people. I can punch a hole through drywall. Any round that is going to reasonably penetrate deep enough and stop a human being is going to penetrate lots of drywall. And that's about as succinct as I can put that. Worry about problem number one first. Best round for the job. Best balance of stopping power and shootability and training cost, all that stuff. Worry about that problem first. That's my thoughts on overpenetration. Someone commented on the episode where I talked about the 9.3 versus the 35 Whelen. If you haven't listened to that episode, you may not care about that unless you're like a big game hunter. But he commented that the 35 Whelen is a reloader's cartridge. And I agree. For here in America, we have a lot more 35 options than 9.3 options. I'd say if you are a reloader, and I may have said that in the episode, I don't remember. But yeah, if you're a reloader, for sure, I would probably go 35 Whelen. I am surprised at how much traction a 9.3 has gotten in recent years. When I looked, it was, I think, dead even on the amount of factory loads available for both, which kind of astonished me. You know, in the global market where you can get a lot of European loads now, maybe that makes sense. But if you're a hand loader, I think it makes more sense to go with the 35 Whelen. Appreciate the comment. I agree with it. Moving on. This is one of the things we talk about in the Patreon chat. Sometimes I'll pose questions. Sometimes we'll play Conflicted, which is a survival card game. We'll just play it in the chat. One of the questions I posed the other day, and we do stuff like this all the time in the Patreon chat, is would you rather have a single-shot .22 rifle for when peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan, or the Taurus Judge? Right? So I tried to, those are your options. You got to pick one. There's two guns there, you and your buddy, and I'm expanding on what I said in the Patreon chat. But let's say you and your buddy stumble across these two guns after you had a ford or river to escape for your lives. You lost all your stuff. You got a pair of pants on. That's it. You come across these two guns in a field. The previous owners are expired, and these are your two choices. And you won the paper, rock, scissors, which settled the debate. You get first pick. you get a single-shot 22 rifle. And let's say it's a standard, one of the really good old Winchester, I think model 67, the old Winchester single shots, right? Let's say you get to pick between that and a almost brand new, never fired, dropped once, Taurus Judge. You get a box of ammo for each. So you get 50 rounds. You'll get 50 rounds, just a small box of 22, and you'll get 50 rounds, let's say 25 rounds of birdshot and 25 rounds of defensive 45 long Colt for the Taurus Judge. Which one of those do you pick? Now, I don't want to mention the Patreon members by name unless they tell me to do so, but one of the patrons that chimed in said he would take the Taurus Judge. And that's not a bad choice. I guess the crux of the matter is, what's your post-apocalyptic scenario depend on, and where are you? If you're talking about putting food on the table, food procurement mostly, like you want to be able to eat and you don't have food, I would say the single shot 22 is by far a better option for putting food on the table. Yeah, you can shoot grouse. I knew a guy that was a big-time elk hunter in Idaho, and he would take a Taurus Judge, the poly-framed one, and shoot grouse with it, or at least he told me that's what he did. And I don't have a reason to doubt him, but he said that when he came across a grouse at really close distance, you could dispatch it with a Taurus Judge. So you could procure food, but trying to shoot a rabbit or something like that, if you're trying to shoot a rabbit or a squirrel to feed your dog or a quail or whatever it is, right? Probably a much better option to have the 22 single shot than it is the Taurus Judge. That's a very close range proposition. It doesn't perform the same way that 410 birdshot out of that rifled short barreled handgun as it would out of an actual shotgun. If you offer me in a shotgun, it would be a completely different thing. But out of the Taurus Judge, you're talking extremely close range. And you can stalk that close to a deer. I've done it, but I would not want to count on it. And if you're doing that, you'd want the 45 long Colt anyway. So I guess it really depends on food procurement, or if you think for defense. For defense, the repeated firepower, the 5 rounds in the Taurus Judge of the defensive rounds, for sure is going to be better than the 1 round of 22. So that's why I thought it was a good question to pose to the Patreon group. What do you think? What do you think is more likely that you're going to need? To put food on the table or to defend yourself? Obviously, those would not be my first picks for a post-apocalyptic gun either way. But if those were my 2 picks, if those were your 2 picks, you won that paper, rock, scissors. Which one of those would you pick for peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan? Now, one of the comments I got was on the 22 Crickett. I did an episode and they commented on the 22 Crickett. Now, the Keystone Crickett is a phenomenal youth firearm. Super light and handy. I think I mentioned it in the guise of having a lightweight single shot, and I'm talking like 2-point-something pounds. Not as your main go-to long gun, but as an additional long gun to go in your pack because they're so light and the ammunition is so light. So, in that case, having one of those in your pack. And somebody commented, I wish they made the Keystone Crickett with a small removable magazine. And I agree. That would be really cool. However, I think there's a better option than the Keystone Crickett. And again, nothing wrong with the Keystone. When I was teaching youth rifle classes, which was one of my favorite things to do, when I was managing a firearms and training company, they said, what do you want to start doing? Like, what do you want to teach? And it wasn't advanced tactical backflip handgun. It was youth shooting classes, because I believe in that. I think that's important, right? And I chose a Keystone Crickett to arm those young men with. And I think it's a great choice for that. But one of the things for that is it's not only a single shot, but after you load the round on the feed ramp and load it, you still have to cock the weapon. So it's slower even than a lot of single shots. Like, it would be slower than a falling block, slower than a normal single shot bolt action rifle. But there's an added measure of safety there. They can't just ram the bolt home and fire. They have to ram the bolt home and then pull the striker back to be able to fire the gun. So for that reason, if it's for me or for you for survival, I think a better option is the Savage, which is what I have. I have a little single-shot Savage, and it's great, and it's light, and I got it instead of the Keystone for that reason. Did a little bit of work to it, to the sights, to make them a little bit more finer, a little bit more of a precision 22, and it's absolutely a tack driver, and it weighs, again, 2-point-something pounds. So I could have my go-to fighting rifle for peanut butter and chocolate, and I could easily stow that little single shot with a sleeve or two of 22 ammo in my pack. And it's not a lot of extra weight. You're talking less than an extra 5 pounds. It would be cool if they made one of those that light with the removable magazine. That would be really cool. They're small. They're not technically a takedown gun, like with a twist of the wrist, but they have, I think, 1 screw or 2 screws, and you can take them apart and put them in your pack, and they would easily fit in most packs. So I think that for that application, one of those with a removable magazine, and I don't even think it has to be 10 rounds, because this shouldn't be your defensive rifle. You know, just a flush fit 3, 4, 5 round magazine, because when you're hunting, yeah, a follow-up shot can be useful, but probably if you haven't finished it in the second or third follow-up shot, you're not likely to have opportunity for more, in my experience as a hunter. But the ability for 1 follow-up shot or 2, maybe you got 2 doves in a branch, and you can take 2 doves if you're quick enough. The ability for 1 quick follow-up shot is nice. So I agree. That's a good thing. Maybe Savage will do that. And I know they make removable magazine ones. But the cool thing about the Savage Rascal single shot is, again, it's super small, super lightweight, 2-point-something pounds. And if you could just get it would add a little bit of weight. But we're talking even an internal magazine where it's just got a spring like a lot of bolt-action hunting rifles, where you just feed the magazines in the top, or feed the rounds in the top of the magazine. That would be good. That would be a really cool thing. Somebody also commented, and this got my brain working, such as the brain God gave me is, if I was designing this, like if Savage was like, here you go, here are the keys to the kingdom, you can do your own R&D and research this own very minimalist, lightweight survival bolt action. I'm sure you could shave weight even off that ultralight rifle by putting in some fluting or whatever, but I'll get to that. So somebody mentioned the 22 Magnum in those. And if it's for like something light to carry around your homestead or whatever for varmints, I think the 22 Magnum is a better cartridge. If you're talking about taking out raccoons, possums, up into coyotes. Not the best coyote round, but certainly better than 22 long rifle. The problem is, I don't think the 22 Magnum is better for survival. Going back to shooting those doves. The whole point that I'm shooting it is that I want to eat it. In my experience, the 22 Magnum can do quite a bit of damage on those small, soft targets. So if it's for food procurement, I think I've hit a point of diminishing returns there. So, for that, if this is a food gathering rifle, I don't like the 22 Magnum as much. You do gain a little bit on the top end. If I had to shoot a deer with either one, because I was going to starve to death otherwise, I would rather have a 22 Magnum. But for a lot of the smaller game, I would rather have the 22. So I think in the survival scenario for this, not talking about defense, just small animal food gathering, I think you lose more. If I were designing this, I would probably flute that barrel, shave a little bit of weight off there, have that internal magazine, which I like for hunting, because you can't drop the magazine out and lose it or whatever. I would make it a 22 Hornet. Internal magazine pushed down from the top, even if it holds 3 or 4 rounds of 22 Hornet. That's what I would like to see, because that 22 Hornet, I can hand load. It's a center fire cartridge. I can load it up quite a bit hotter even than 22 Magnum, and I can load it down. And then I can have my different loads. I would have to know my point of aim, point of impact. But if I'm really diligent and do my experimenting, then I could have pretty similar point of aim, point of impact with a heavier bullet for bigger stuff and a lighter weight, fast varmint bullet for like destroying varmints, and maybe a little bit heavier, moderate velocity one for other scenarios. Maybe even load up a subsonic one because it's a bolt action, so I don't have to worry about enough power to cycle the action, right? So I think that would be the better way to go. I think that would be the best option if I were designing this ultimate lightweight, put in the pack, very lightweight survival rifle. I think that would be pretty cool. Also, I should address a correction I got from one of the patrons, and thank you. And it wasn't like you called it a clip and it's a magazine. It was actual good. When I was talking about the semi-auto cartridges in revolvers, I was picturing in my head how they do it is spacing where the bullet goes into the case. And I think he said I several times in that episode referred to that as head spacing on the rim, which is not correct. That's what you would do on a normal revolver cartridge, head space on the rim. For a semi-auto cartridge, if you're going to do it without moon clips, it's going to head space on the case mouth. And that's what I was thinking in my head, but that's not what I said. And I didn't want to confuse anybody, and he pointed that out. And I know that patron, like I actually know him, like I've met him in person. Good guy, and I fully understand what he was trying to do, and I appreciate the correction. I really do. I am humbled that you care that much to correct me on that. So yes, if you're talking about some revolvers actually can shoot semi-auto cartridges without moon clips, and they head space on the case mouth where the bullet actually seats into the brass case. That's what I was thinking in my head, but that is not what I said, so I wanted to issue that correction properly. Thank you for that correction. Okay, thoughts on the LA robotic police dog. You might know that I'm former LAPD. What are my thoughts on this? Okay, I heard this from Bear Independent, and a good channel. If you want to go check them out, Bear Independent is a good channel. I support them, and I own, and I'm looking at right now in my truck, one of their medical kits, Small the Bat Kit. Anyway, I heard it on Bear Independent. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. So I went and verified it, looked it up. It seems like, yeah, it's a real thing. What are my thoughts on this robotic police dog? Okay, first of all, I should probably do some more research, but here's my overarching thing. We've been using machines for a long time. So whether that is a basic stick to defend ourselves from a wild animal, to a rock, to putting the rock on the stick to make a hammer, or sharpening the rock on the stick to make an axe. A robot, to me, in that sense, is really no different. If it's an extension of the human being using it, that's where my line in the sand is. If that is the case, if the human being, like there's a police officer with a pair of whatever they call that, sorry if you hear me getting a little distracted, my Rhodesian, Alexander Hamilton, is running with the truck on this dirt mountain road to get him some exercise. Their breed standard, I believe, says they're supposed to be able to run 30 miles in a stretch. And I am pretty big into fitness, but I don't run 30 miles every day. So he runs beside the truck to get his wiggles out. Where was I? If that robot is an extension of somebody wearing like those VR goggles that is controlling that robot, like a drone, like we use all the time in the military, and there's a human being the literal shot caller on that robot, saying what it can and can't do. I really have no moral quandaries with that. Maybe it wasn't the best use of money, but as far as morals go, whatever. It's an extension. It's no different than a handgun or a shotgun. What I'm against is AI against people, right? This is a situation where you might want that STI Perfect 10, talking about you might want that much firepower in a 10 millimeter, right? If you're fighting, evil AI robots, i.e. Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Whatever the case is, I'm against AI against people. it's sad enough nowadays when human beings don't have good morals based on the word of God, what's right and wrong. You may have heard about an incident recently where the AI robot lied to get something done. Well, that's straight up against the law of God. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. That robot is not accountable to that, really, to me. The person who made that robot is accountable. I am against AI, especially if AI has some kind of projection of force that can be used independently of a handler, right? I'm against that. I'm against that robot if it can make autonomous decisions on its own that could harm a human being. I am against that, and there's my line in the sand. If it's just a robot controlled 100% by a human being, then, again, I see it no different than any other tool, be it a more advanced, complicated one. But we've been doing that. We've been doing that a long time. I'm against artificial intelligence making its own shots, calling its own shots against use of force on people in any kind of moral situation or dilemma. I'm against that. On that, I have had some feedback on reaching out to Bear Independent. He is somebody that I support on Patreon and have for years. I'm a big fan of Bear Independent. Been listening for a long time. That being said, his channel is way bigger than mine. So I sent him an email. One of you guys reached out. I heard it on a live stream. So Bear Independent's channel is much bigger than mine. So I'm sure he gets a ton of emails. I reached out to him. I would, since his channel is bigger than mine, per biblical principle, the lesser is blessed by the greater. I would love to come on his channel and talk about guns or do a live stream about guns and tactics stuff. He used to do the Tactical Tuesday. And since that's what you guys generally like about this is the real world firsthand experience, maybe that would be cool. But you guys, if you want that done, I've reached out once. If you guys want that done, reach out to Bear Independent and tell him that you would like that. And maybe if he sees it a couple of times, he'll hearken unto it. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that, and that just made me, the thing about the AI robot that I heard on the Bear Brief today made me think about that. So those two are kind of intertwined in the brain today. All right, and I may cut this out, I may keep it, but let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the life of the host here. By God's grace, so happy to be west of the Mississippi, and if I get to pick west of the Missouri, recently traveled, if you keep up, stayed quite a bit longer than I would have liked in Florida. I love my wife. We are one flesh. Her family is now my family. And we have spent a large chunk of the last few months in Florida. Central Florida, visiting her and her family. I could not wait to get out of there. Not because I don't love her family, but Florida has 400 and some people per square mile. I am blessed to be in Idaho with, I believe last time I checked, 23 people per square mile. And I'm in northern Idaho, like north Idaho, the Redoubt, with far less than that. I am right now in the wild, and I cannot see another human being or building, for that matter, or anything, and I haven't for a while. So I'm very happy to be back out west. Our plan is to be here for a couple of weeks. My wife and I are trying to be in tune with where God wants us to be. We are strangers and pilgrims on the earth, and so are you. This earth is not our home. But we're hoping God reveals to us where He wants us to stay for a little bit, a respite from our pilgrimage. So our plan is to be here for a couple of weeks, God willing, and then head to Alaska. Plan on going to Washington and then getting on the ferry and then moving to Alaska and being there for a couple of months and seeing if that's where God wants us to be. Spent last summer in coastal Oregon and I loved it. I loved the area. I love the flora and the fauna. I think from a survival perspective, the coastal Oregon, not Portland. Portland is not on the coast. Coastal Oregon is one of the best survivable places on the planet. From Brookings up to Astoria. We spent this summer traveling up the whole coast, and great survival country, and we were all set to look for land there, and then they passed that very infringy gun legislation. So that was out. So since we like the climate, the flora, and the fauna, we're thinking about going to we, by God's grace, are planning on going to southern Alaska. The southern part, the rainforest, Pacific Northwest part, Sitka, Juneau, and that kind of area. Don't really have a desire to live like in the Arctic Circle. I think you get to a point of diminishing return as far as survivability there goes. But since by God's grace we both are blessed to work remote and we can live from anywhere, we thought we would try Alaska. Been traveling for years, joined the Marines at 18. I've been traveling pretty much ever since. A couple of years here, a couple of years there. Been to, I believe, 48 of the 50 states. Alaska will be 49. The other one is Hawaii. Really have no desire to go there because they're restrictive and expensive. So really, maybe I would go there if somebody invited me or something. But other than that, really no desire. And I've lived in a lot of the states. And I did a whole episode on area study of the U.S. for survivability. Did a whole map for the patrons and a bunch of other stuff. And for the patrons, I give my actual bug out locations, like actual GPS coordinates for my good bug out locations. I just found one this weekend by God's grace. Actually on the Washington side, but if you know the chimney of northern Idaho is fairly thin, it's so remote that you have to go through Idaho to get there. I don't know that there's a way to get to there without going through Idaho. And we were hiking in the backcountry, Hell's Canyon area, and most of that is pretty high deserty sagebrush. We found a beautiful remote canyon with a cave and a creek and all kinds of edible flora and fauna. That's something my wife really loves to do. I'm more of the hunter, slayer of beasts. She's more of the forager. She loves finding new plants and doing research on them and what can we do with them and foraging and making jams. That's something we really like to do. And if it gets us both outside, quality time, I'm all about it. That's a way better date to me than going and spending money on some kind of fancy food at a restaurant. Anyway, that's a little bit of what's going on with us. I shared that actual GPS coordinates from that latest bug out location along with many others with the patrons. If you want to become a patron because of that or because you want me to answer questions, they ask me questions all the time, many of which I didn't get to today, that I just answered their questions for them. And I don't know the answer to every question, right? I'm not all-knowing. But if I do have a good answer, I will try and help out. That's something that the patrons get. In addition to the bug out stuff and commercial-free early content, if you want to become a patron, consider going to Patreon and signing up. There should be a link in the show notes. Okay, so in closing, tactical tip of the day. Now this is coming from, I didn't come up with this, this is a military thing that I mentioned. If you don't listen to Alpha Male podcast as well, I have one coming out, may come out before or after this one, on bugging out of the city. Now, I've preached many times, this is, again, Bear Independent, preached many times, and Viking Preparedness, of whom I am also a patron of, and I think that may be how I found Bear Independent. But anyway, come out of her, my people. Revelation 18, come out of her, my people. If you can, come out of the cities. But I spent large chunks of my life in the city as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. If that's where God's calling you to be, then that's between you and God. If you can come out early. Bug out early, as Pastor Joe likes to say. But one of the things in that episode I talk about bugging out of the city. Your tactical tip, have a panic azimuth. A panic azimuth. A cardinal direction or a compass direction in degrees that you and your family know. If the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan, right? If it hits the fan and you're in the Dallas, Fort Worth Metroplex area, whatever, I'm just picking a place, right? And the middle, the city center, the nucleus of that is east of you, and where you work is west of there, and where you live in the hinterlands is west of there. If something happens and your wife's at work and you're at work and your college-age kid is at work, or at school, I'm sorry, and something happens, you all head due west. So your panic azimuth is 270 degrees, and then you hit the railroad tracks. and then you decide you have a predetermined fallback location, not your actual bug out location probably, but a fallback location where you can all go to. Your panic azimuth. You go 270 degrees, you hit the railroad tracks, and then you go to the abandoned grain silos. That's where you meet up at. You don't want to go back to the city center, right? You know, when you have to bug out and you have a certain amount of time before gridlock happens, you want to get out. You don't want to closer into the center of the city. So that panic azimuth, that's your tactical tip of the day. Now, your tactical verse of the day, you think I would pick Revelation 18, since I already talked about it, come out for my people. But I'm going to pick a very similar one. Come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. Be separate, be set apart. That's what holy means, to be set apart. Now, you could be set apart in the country. You could be, if you had service where I am, you could be looking out at the beautiful mountains and not another human soul in sight or even a building. And you could be thinking about, you know, half-naked women on TikTok when you're married. That's not coming out for my people. That's not being separate. You can come out in your mind and in your soul and in your body. You can be separate even living in a city. I will certainly concede it's a lot easier out here in the country, but you should be separate in your soul and your mind, wherever you are. Come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.